welcome back to another episode of Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. Dr. Cinecropia is out this week, so it's just me, nurse practitioner Mandi Dickey. So guess what that means? It is a TBI takeover week. So ABCs of concussion. We've been doing this series kind of off and on throughout for a while now, and we're up to letters J and K today. So again, why am I hopping in on Recharging the Human Battery and talking about this? Because our brain is our powerhouse that runs our entire body. And not many of us are really good at identifying what a concussion is, what a concussion does to your body. And we've talked a lot about what it is and what it isn't. And if you haven't listened to the earlier episodes, a concussion is a form of mild traumatic brain injury. That is the definition of mild traumatic brain injury. And then we've got moderate and severe, which as of this year, those terminology might be changing because we're coming up with a new classification system for traumatic brain injury, because those, quote, mild TBIs can cause any of the host of symptoms that we've talked about on these ABCs of concussion episodes. So lots of things that can affect people that have had a concussion. And as we started out, every one of these episodes has a list of letters within that alphabet letter, or letters as the case may be, depending on time as we cover them. But it's all related to somebody that's had a concussion, somebody that's recovering from a concussion. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What kind of issues might somebody with a concussion deal with? So if you, as the listener, have had a concussion at some point, you've had a brain injury at some point, you might be experiencing some of these symptoms and you didn't know why you were experiencing them. And on the flip side, again, if you have some of these symptoms and you don't know why, and you don't know if you've had a head injury, think back to when those symptoms started and see, did anything happen that may have caused a head injury? And as we've talked about kind of breaking myths before on here, you don't have to hit your head and you don't have to lose consciousness to get a concussion. Only about half of the people actually hit their head. The rest are from just inertia, from like a car accident if you get whiplash, or if you stop suddenly and your head continues to move. And only about 10% of people actually lose consciousness. The rest stay awake. So it does not mean you actually had to black out to get a concussion. So I like to educate that, and I talk about that in every single one of my appointments with my patients when I'm doing new consultations for concussions, that you don't have to hit your head, you don't have to lose consciousness. So again, think back. If you have some of these symptoms, you don't know why, think back to when they started. Did anything happen prior to them starting that may have explained it? And is there anything that you can do for it now? Yes, there's really no endpoint to getting better. So as we talk about all of the different treatments that come up in the different alphabet letters, it doesn't matter when you start them, you will have improvement. I met someone 17 years post-concussion who started having improvement in some of their symptoms because of getting different treatments. So as I talk about some of these things, again, there's hope for people who didn't think that there was hope before. I saw a patient in my clinic this week who had a head injury from a car accident 10 years ago. And she told me this was the first time she felt like there was something that could be done for her in 10 years. Now, granted, 10 years ago, we didn't know the same things that we do now. But that said, there still is, there's hope. There's all sorts of things that can be done to help people that have had concussion. So as we move into today's topics, letters J and K, we're going to talk about, again, a lot of things that have to do with concussion, how it affects our brain, how it affects the person that's experiencing the concussion. So to give a little teaser before we go to the break here, the first word I'm going to talk about is judgment. And when we talk about that, there are multiple meanings to it. It could be judgment of the person that has the injury, or judgment meaning you've done something wrong. So there's lots of different meanings to that one, and we'll talk about it more on the other side of the break. But there's so many words today: judgment, your jaw being affected, jail, justice kind of along with that, jealousy, into kids and knowledge at the end. So lots of good topics from today. I hope you stick around, and we will see you on the other side of the break here on AM 950 Radio. Welcome back from the break. Again, Mandi Dickey, nurse practitioner here on AM 950 radio with Recharging the Human Battery. Dr. Sinacropi is out, so I've got my TBI takeover for the day, ABCs of concussion, letters J and K. Before the break, I was teasing you with the first word. So the first word is judgment. So as we talk about this, there's a lot of judgment that can happen with somebody that's had a brain injury. A lot of times it is the judgment that is passed on to someone that has had the brain injury. Because it is an invisible disability, it can be assumed that the person has nothing wrong with them. They look just fine, and that's probably the least happy term anybody ever says to a person that's had a brain injury. You look just fine. Well, of course you do, because it didn't affect the outside of your body. It only affected your brain. When I say it only affected your brain, that's not really true, though, either, because your brain affects everything in your body. It's just not seen. So it's something that we feel. It's something that we can work with cognitively when we're trying to think and speak and read and do all the things that require brain function. There might be mistakes because there's a misunderstanding, or because the person with the brain injury does not remember things. So they might be perceived as being reckless or being careless. So again, a judgment that is passed on to them as being reckless or careless. The person that has the injury might be perceived as being lazy or attention seeking or not wanting to work, especially if this is a work comp type of injury. When in reality, they have all of these symptoms that they're still trying to deal with, and they haven't gotten answers. And being a provider taking care of patients that have work comp injuries, sometimes it's very difficult to get their therapies approved, to get treatments approved for them. So it's really hard for them to get better when they can't get the treatments that they need to get them better. So it frustrates me very much as a provider trying to help my patients when their treatments are not approved and they're being told that they don't need them because they should be fine. Because 20 years ago in the research, most patients got better within the first couple of weeks because they didn't look beyond that, and we didn't know the long-term effects. We know the long-term effects. We know that they're there. And we know that 30+% of people still continue to have post-concussive symptoms well over a year beyond their injury. So it's not that they're attention seeking. It's not that they're lazy. They physically can't do some of the things without getting help. And then people might think that the person that has the injury dwells too much on it. They should just get over it. But at the same time, you're not going to tell somebody with cancer to get over it, or with really bad diabetes to just get over it. It affects your everyday life. It affects your function. It affects your happiness in life. So you can't just get over that. You have to learn tools to cope with it, ways to deal with it, and ways to still live your life and look for the good things that are happening. But it's still a grieving process. So you have to let that person grieve. We talked about that back in G. I'll go back to that episode. Judgment can be affected by the concussed individual. So not just judgment that's passed on to them, but judgment for the person who has the injury themselves. This happens especially when we have frontal lobe damage. So the front part of the brain, that's where our sense of purpose is. That's where our sense of right and wrong is. That's what inhibits us from doing something that we shouldn't be doing. So when we have injury to that part of the brain, it can affect your judgment and your ability to make safe decisions and to say things that are appropriate. This is where we can see personality changes, and people become more agitated, more easily frustrated and angered, and they don't find joy in things. We've talked about all of those letters before. But that's where we can see all these things happen, is if you have injury to the frontal lobe. You don't just have to hit the front of your brain to have that. So we talked before about the coup, contra coup, the injury on the same side and the injury on the opposite side. If you hit the back of your head, your brain is still going to slosh around, and you can still end up with injury to the front part of the brain because of an injury on the back of your head. So that location is not the only place that you can get an injury and find those changes. But again, with that frontal lobe, if it is affected, regardless of how the injury happened, we get that lack of insight. You can't see what's going on. You don't know some of your own limitations, and you might take unnecessary risks. You might not realize your deficits. I saw that in the stroke world before I saw it in the TBI world, but it's the same kind of thing. A brain injury is a brain injury, regardless of how it happens, whether it's a stroke in the brain or a hit to the head. you still can end up with that lack of judgment, lack of realizing that you have deficits. I can say that from experience because I didn't realize my own issues right away for several months. It took a lot of kind of peeling back the layers of the onion in order to see them all. So, how do we manage these things with judgment? For the individual with the injury, we go through cognitive therapy, speech therapy. They do things to try to help you remember things, help you identify what's going on around you. Occupational therapy can help with the day-to-day activities. How do you manage your schedule so that you don't have to worry about these things impeding your judgment? And then neuropsychological testing is there to just identify where some of those deficits can be. We don't have ways to manage for the public. That's where this education comes in, understanding what's going on with somebody that has a brain injury so that you can have a little bit more grace for that person and give them a little bit of understanding, knowing that their brain isn't working 100% as it should. So giving them some grace, giving them a little bit of space to heal and recognize that they're not doing it on purpose. They're not doing it to be a-holes. They're doing it because their brain is injured. Okay, so education, that's our management for that one. The next topic on the letter J is jaw. And this is one that people probably don't think about as often as they probably should. There was a paper recently published in the Facial Plastic Surgery journal, and it was a publication of the Journal of American Medical Association that identified 75% of patients with a mandibular fracture, meaning they had a jaw fracture, were found to have a concussion. And sometimes you might hear that and say, well, duh, because they've had an injury that fractured their jaw. Of course, they had an injury that damaged their brain, but we don't often think about that. We see orthopedic type of fractures as the trauma themselves, and we tend not to look any further. So 75% of patients with a jaw fracture had a concussion as well. And again, so if you're thinking about it, if you had a force hard enough to fracture your jaw, it would make sense that your brain took a little bit of a shaking as well. So where do we see this happening? It happens a lot in assaults. It can be in sports injuries or motor vehicle accidents where we end up with a jaw fracture because of that crush type of injury. There was a literature review published back in 2021 in the Advances of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery that also cited that 24.5% of patients with some sort of temporomandibular disease were associated with a history of trauma. So we think of TMJ a lot, that clicking, popping sound when you're chewing. It may be painful. That is one of the temporomandibular diseases. So again, looking back at the history with somebody with something like TMJ, almost a quarter of those patients were found to have a history of concussion that might have led to that TMJ as well. And jaw pain can be associated with those TMJ disorders. That can come from that strain from a rapid head movement or the muscle tension that comes afterwards that can actually make that worse, that can further exacerbate that pain. And that can lead to chronic headaches, facial pain, and neck discomfort. And those are sometimes the things that bring patients in to get help, is because they're having those types of symptoms. They don't really think about the concussion part of it. They had that fracture. They're worried about the fracture. They're worried about the facial pain, but they don't necessarily put two and two together that something may have happened to their brain at the time. Because again, we tend to get very focused on those orthopedic injuries. So symptoms of a temporomandibular disease can include tenderness in the face, jaw, neck, and shoulders, ear popping, ringing in the ears, clicking or popping sound in the jaw. That's what we often think about. Difficulty or pain with chewing, swelling on the side of the face that's affected, lockjaw where you can't open your jaw quite as well, headaches, and dizziness. And a lot of those will overlap with a concussion. So some of the things we've talked about with concussion are the same symptoms of TMJ. So again, if you think about it, it makes sense that the two things can happen together. How do we manage these things? If somebody has temporomandibular dysfunction, they have jaw issues, we typically recommend that they avoid hard foods, eat a soft diet, especially while the pain is there, use over-the-counter pain relievers such as Tylenol, ibuprofen. But again, with the caveat, we don't want you using those things on a regular basis because then we start having rebound type of issues. Ice packs initially. Why don't we want to continue using ice packs long-term? Because ice can actually slow the healing process beyond that little acute phase. So ice packs initially to treat that pain and then not so much later on. Relaxation techniques. I talked about the strain and the muscle tension making those things worse. So learning some relaxation techniques, learning how to relax the muscles of your jaw. So many times, many of us will hold our jaws really tense when we're stressed, when we're concentrating, and that can make those symptoms of temporomandibular disease even worse. Physical therapy can be really helpful for this. There are different manual therapies that they can do to release those jaw muscles, calm them down. I will say I've had that done by my neurological chiropractor, and it was not comfortable at the moment that he did it, but afterwards it was really helpful, and I didn't realize how much tension I was actually holding in my jaw. And there are exercises specific to that temporomandibular joint to loosen things up as well. Some people need injections into those muscles. Botox can be one of them that we inject to release those muscle tension and relax it so that we don't have that increased pain. Mouth guards can be helpful so people don't bite down on their jaw at night. Other dental and orthodontic evaluations to see might you be a good candidate for one of those oral appliances. And then some might be severe enough that they might need surgery to correct this. So identifying all of these different angles and figuring out how they play a role. If you have jaw pain, it can make a lot of your other sensations worse because of the tension, because of the headaches that come from it. That's one of the things as I'm assessing headaches in patients that have concussion is, do you have jaw pain? Do you have those kind of things that can contribute to that headache so that we know what's causing it? I'm not the kind of provider that likes to just give pain medications and put a Band-Aid on that pain. We'd like to figure out why you're having it so we can fix that underlying problem, such as a jaw that is not doing what it's supposed to do after an injury. Okay. Next topic, next J letter is jail. We have talked about this a little bit previously in episodes, but I have a lot more information that I want to share on this one. So according to information from the CDC, almost half of all adults that are in correctional or juvenile detention facilities have a history of TBI. I'll say it again. Almost half of those individuals in correctional and detention facilities have a history of TBI. We talked a little bit earlier about how that frontal lobe can get damaged. You can have personality changes, judgment changes that can lead them into the correctional facility system. Intimate partner violence is also related to TBIs. So when a female gets abused by the male partner in the relationship, that's the most common cause that happens with that intimate partner violence. It's very common in females in correctional facilities and detention facilities as well, that history of the intimate partner violence leading to that injury that led them into the correctional facility. So it's a huge problem that we're looking at with this. And there are links to mental health problems, substance abuse disorders, impulsive behavior, difficulty controlling anger, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts in these individuals, as well as just problems with thinking and behavior that we've talked about previously. So having that traumatic brain injury changes all of those things for a person. It increases the risk of substance use. It increases the risk of mental health problems, which we see a lot of these problems in people who are incarcerated. So those in the correctional facilities might have more challenges accessing TBI-specific care and even just adhering to the treatment programs. They already have behavior changes. They might be at a point where they're thinking, well, why bother? Why does anybody even care about me at this point? And we don't have the same kind of cares in that facility that we can in the general public. Now, that's not saying a whole lot because in the general public, there's still a wide variety of care for TBI as well. But we're lacking a lot for these people that are incarcerated, getting them the treatment that they need that could potentially prevent some of the further activity for them. And there are higher rates of recidivism, meaning they return to the correctional facility after they're released. And there's a greater need for crisis intervention services for people with TBI compared to those without. And those TBI symptoms might increase the chance of disciplinary action while they're in the correctional facility. Because again, their inhibition is affected, their judgment is affected. So they might get in more trouble while they're incarcerated than somebody who didn't have a TBI. That's not to say all of them, but a good number. Again, half of them have that history. So what can we do and what should we be doing? When we look at what's there in the system currently, routine screening is currently very limited. There's not a lot of good screening for people to see if they've had a history of TBI, if they have any symptoms of TBI that still need to be addressed. So what can we do? Increasing the awareness among the correctional staff would be helpful. Doing more education for the staff, letting them know what kind of behaviors and what might be present in somebody that has a TBI, how to work with them, provide better screening and services to help those individuals, more TBI-related services, coordination with the probation services so when they do get released, so that they can get follow-up screening and treatment after their release. Try to prevent them from going back into the correctional system again. There are some state programs that have some of these services in place, but not all of them. And I didn't see Minnesota on the list. So we are lacking a little bit in our release services as well, trying to help these people that are in the correctional facilities to prevent them from going back. We can try to help them be better humans after they get out or even while they are there, especially depending on when their injury occurred. So lots that we can do. That would take some huge changes in the correctional systems, but we can potentially undertake that. Next topic then is jealousy. And this one is an interesting one because jealousy and envy can show up in relationship, especially to comparing your healing to someone else's. So this really affects the person that has the brain injury. The expectations about the recovery might line up with what your own recovery looks like. And that can lead to a lot of frustration. And I think a lot of that comes into play where we have put in some not really good expectations for what happens with a brain injury, considering we keep telling people that within a couple of weeks or even a few days, they should be back to normal. I don't know how many times I've heard from a patient that they went to the emergency room and they said, take a few days off of work, you should be fine after that. None of us have a crystal ball to say how quickly you're going to get better. So we can't tell you with any kind of certainty that in a couple of days, you're going to be back to normal. So that expectation that we set up there makes people feel like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not getting better any sooner? And then they look at somebody else who is getting better and they're like, well, why is that person getting better and I'm not getting better? And then seeing other people still carry on with their normal life can lead to jealousy. So I know I felt that a lot, especially early on in my recovery process, where I was stuck at home, couldn't do anything, really couldn't do the social activities either. And initially my friends were checking in on me, and then that kind of dwindled because they were still going to work. They were still going to all their kids' activities and they were busy with their lives. And people would complain about having to go to work. And oh man, they would love to just not have to go to work. And I was sitting here thinking, all I want to do is go to work. So there was that jealousy that was there as well, because I was not getting better and I was not getting back to normal life while everybody else was out there leading their normal lives. So you can be jealous of somebody else's recovery. You can be jealous that they're going on with their lives as normal. You can be jealous of the things that other people complain about, like I just explained. All of those things that the recovering individual wishes they could do that everybody else is still doing. So what impact does this have? Relationships can be impacted. As I mentioned, some of my friends kind of dwindled off on checking in. It can lead to jealousy or resentment on their part too, if they think that you should be getting better. So there's a lot of relationships that we've talked about this previously that don't last through the recovery period of a brain injury. And I have that reported to me multiple times a week, probably from my patients that see me in clinic, that they don't get together with their friends anymore. They're not as close with their family because people don't understand. Again, kind of the basis of why I'm doing this education, to help everybody understand this a little bit better so that we can have a little bit more compassion for our friends and family members. How do we manage jealousy? As hard as it is, you need to focus on your own individual journey. No two people will recover exactly the same from a concussion. I used to say this all the time when I was a 100% stroke provider. No two people with stroke will recover the same. So brain injury in general, you can have two people sitting right next to each other with the same kind of brain injury. It happened the same way, and they're still not going to recover the same because everybody has different factors that go into it, whether it is other health conditions that you have, whether it's previous concussions that you've had, whether it's you're grieving at the same time as you're going through your TBI recovery. You've got PTSD, you've got all these other things that are pulling against your recovery. And You can't focus on what somebody else's recovery looks like. You have to focus on your own, as difficult as that may be. Practice mindfulness. We talk about this all the time, and everybody thinks it's kind of woo-woo that you do this deep breathing and be mindful about your activities. And people say that's not going to help you. It actually will. There's a lot of research to show that mindfulness, being mindful, being present, being grateful for what you have, does actually improve your mood. When your mood is improved, your brain can heal better. So it does actually have a connection there. Seek support, and that could be support from friends and family. It could be professional support with a therapist. It can be a support group dealing with some of those things. Again, in a support group, you're going to have other people that have been in that situation. They understand what you're going through, whereas your friends and family that haven't been injured might not have that same understanding. Communication. I always say communication goes a long way. That's probably the bane of most relationships, is communication. When you don't communicate with people, things get misunderstood, things get taken the wrong way. When you communicate your needs, when you communicate what's going on with you, it opens that door for better relationships, close relationships. And then you might not feel as jealous, because then you might be able to see the struggles that other people have too and not focus just on your own struggles. Along that line, though, you need to be kind to yourself. We're always really kind to other people. We're very forgiving of other people generally, not always, but we're more forgiving of other people than we are of ourselves. We are always our own worst critic. So when we're trying to see what our recovery looks like, I tend to remind my patients that when you're trying to look at your recovery, you can't compare yourself to what you were before you were injured. Compare yourself to the day of your injury, because then you will always see the strides that you have made. You are not as bad as you were the day of your injury or the day after, whenever your symptoms started up. So be kind to yourself in that respect. Give yourself a pat on the back for all the healing that you have done, and know that there's more healing yet to come. Nobody stays stagnant forever. That is not the way we do things. What slows you down is if your mood is holding you back. If you're really feeling down and you're not seeing that positivity, you're not going to try for the positivity. And that's when we start to taking steps backwards. And then again, get professional help if you need it, because sometimes that is required. I had a patient this week tell me, well, I've never really thought about talking to somebody and if that's going to help. I said, actually it can, because then you get out some of those frustrations that you don't feel like you can tell your loved ones because you don't want to burden them. Put it on a professional. They will take it. That's what they get paid for. So they can take on those burdens for you so that you're not laying those out for your friends and family. And you can enjoy your friends and family. Talk about the weather, talk about the animals outside, your kids' activities, rather than telling them about the things you're frustrated with. Tell that to a professional. Let them do that part. The next part of this is justice, and that kind of goes along with the jail system a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit. If somebody caused your concussion, you feel like you need justice. So if it was a car accident or an assault, you might want to pursue legal action to cover those medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. And what does all that mean in real terms? We'll kind of talk about that moving forward here. It's best to consult with an attorney who has experience with concussion. Have good documentation. Collect all your medical records so you have it all together. And then you can either negotiate a settlement or you can proceed with a lawsuit. And settlement values are determined by several things, whether it's severity of the injury, the medical needs and long-term care needs of the individual, the ability to work. You have to kind of consider that lost income a little bit. And then pain and suffering, you do need to think about personality changes, social changes, loss of friendships, inability to perform and enjoy your hobbies. All of those things get affected. It's harder to put a numerical value on those things, but they are affected. And then liability issues. Some states will proportionately reduce or eliminate compensation if you were partially at fault. So that especially comes into play like with a car accident type of thing. And gross negligence, if there was reckless or if there was malicious intent, that might add some punitive damages. So it all depends on kind of what all these things go through. And then insurance policy limits. That comes into play with car accidents. I know that one from really good experience. Not really good experience, personal experience. It wasn't a good experience. But those insurance policy limits will kind of say what kind of compensation you can get, unfortunately. There was an article published by the Brain Injury Association of America that warns you against settling too soon. And I will tell you why. Because brain injuries are hard to diagnose. You might need to prove your injury with special imaging that is not available to most patients. If you go get a CT or an MRI, 99% of the time it will not show the damage to your brain. It will not show your injury. There is an image called a SPECT image, which is a special type of CT that uses a radioactive dye, that a few places across the country have this. That actually has been proven to show accurately where in your brain you've had a brain injury. It can't tell you how many you've had, it can't tell you how recent it was, but it can tell you where a brain injury has happened based on the changes that are seen in all patients that have had a brain injury. So it's a really cool 3D image that's created. So if you need to prove that injury, you might need to go to one of those clinics, which might mean going out of state to get that image done. You might not fully understand the extent of your injuries if you settle too soon. It's kind of like pulling back the layers of an onion, as I've mentioned before. As you go through and you get better with one thing, other things might pop up. So you might not realize all your deficits right away. So you might optimistically think that you're going to recover faster than you do. So you do need to consult with a specialist to estimate those future needs, see what might be there if you don't recover as fast as you think you're going to. And then, shocker, insurance companies, excuse me, insurance companies don't have your best interest at heart. They have their best interest at heart. So their first offer to you is usually less than what your case is worth. And you need to know that, and you need to have legal representation so that you get what your case is actually worth. Once you make a settlement, that's final. You can't go back. You permanently give up any rights to go after them. So there's no do-overs. There's no repeats. It is what it is. So you don't want to get that miscalculated that first time around. So take time. That Brain Injury Association of America does have it does have a list of preferred attorneys for each state that have experience in dealing with TBI cases. So it's a great starting point. It's not to say that you have to go with one of those attorneys, but it's a place to start. See if you will work well with one of those people, if they will take your case. And then completing your legal case may close the door for that part of your recovery, which means it allows you to go on with your healing. You get some closure to it. So whenever you do get to the end of that case, it might bring you some closure so that you can mentally recover the rest of the way. I will cover this more in letter L when we get there, because I've already worked on that one. So there's a lot more to come with that, but for time's sake, that's a good starting point. So reason to listen to the show moving forward. All right, moving on to letter K. I only have a few of them, which is why I put J and K together. So letter K, the first one is kids. And it's just another way to say children. We did talk about children a little bit back in letter C, but I also wanted to talk about a few more things just to bring it back into your attention. So 50% of sports-related concussions, those that are seen in the emergency room especially, are in age 17 and under. Half of all sports-related concussions are under adulthood. So as we think about all of these things that I've talked about in every single one of these letters of the alphabet, if you have sports-related concussions at a young age, it does affect your brain as you grow, especially if it happens during key times in your brain's development. It can affect things that we don't often attribute to the brain injury. So we often think that kids are made of rubber. They fall down, they bounce back up, they look just fine. Again, that's the common theme with concussion is you look just fine, but they look just fine, so we think that they are just fine, but they might develop difficulties later. They can develop things like ADHD, learning difficulties, behavior issues, and depending on where they are in those growth periods, that can affect some of these things more than others. Oftentimes, it's difficult to diagnose these things, and it's not often thought of as a result of a concussion. So if somebody had a brain injury, they had a concussion, they were in a car accident, they were in a sports injury, they fell out of a 2-story window and landed on their head. Again, they look just fine, so we don't think anything of it. And then shortly after that or years later, they develop things like ADHD. And we don't put those two things together. We think it's a separate diagnosis. Yeah, they had that injury, but it recovered. They were fine. And now they have behavior issues. Now they're in special ed classes in school, and we can't figure out why they're having all this destructive behavior. We'll think back a little bit, like we've been talking about in every one of these episodes. Think back a little bit and look to see, was there something that caused it? Oftentimes, it can be that cause. And there was a course that I took earlier this year. There was a social worker in the class that shared a story of a student in her school had difficulty with cognition, with behavior issues, all of a sudden had all these things going on, and they couldn't figure out what caused it. And they looked back in the history. The child had fallen out of like a 2 or 3 story window when they were 2 or 3 years old, and they were deemed not to have a head injury because the head imaging was negative for a bleed. We've talked about this before. That head imaging is probably going to be negative. Didn't mean they didn't have a head injury, but it certainly could explain why they suddenly had all these behavior changes that they didn't have previously. So sometimes we need to do a little bit of digging, do some homework on that person that we're trying to help them figure out all these issues. Did they have something that needs to actually be addressed? And kids can also be affected by the parent who sustains a concussion. I had one of my patients one time ask me if there was something genetic that could be passed on. And I said, no, it's not genetic. You had the head injury, your kids didn't, but your behavior has an impact on your kids. So that's the part we need to realize. So we've talked about how head injuries can affect relationships and how you communicate with other people and how you perceive things around you. As a parent, if you have the concussion, and you have these children at home asking, why, and saying, mommy, 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 daddy, daddy, daddy. They're asking for all these things, and your fuse is really short. Your temper is going to come out on that child. It does not mean that that child is in the clear from that injury. That's why I always say that the entire family is my patient, because everybody gets affected. So it's very common for that concussive individual to have that short temper, get easily upset, and take it out on their children. Doesn't mean that they are being abusive per se, but raising your voice at them, doing discipline when it's unnecessary, or not understanding your kids' behavior when their behavior is in response to yours. So we have to take that into account and think about that. Kids can have PTSD from witnessing a traumatic event that caused their parents TBI, whether it is that intimate partner violence or whether it was a car accident. If they were in the back seat, you were in the front seat, you got hit head on and you got damaged, your kid's going to worry about you and your safety moving forward. So they can absolutely have PTSD just knowing that you had that injury. And then it's also important to note, kind of along that line, if a motor vehicle accident caused a TBI for somebody in the car, you need to make sure you screen everybody in the car for that brain injury. I had another patient who the child in the back seat got a brain injury. The adult in the front seat was told they did not have a brain injury. But guess what? They had a lot of cognitive issues afterwards. If you're in the same car and somebody had that much force to cause their brain injury, good chance multiple people in the car actually had some affected symptoms as well. So kids may benefit in general, kind of getting back to this one, kids may benefit from counseling for any of these reasons, whether it's them that has the injury or the parent that has the injury, then now it's affected the entire family. So lots and lots of things there. And we will probably talk about that a little bit more when we get to letter P, because pediatrics, I got to cover it again. It never hurts to bring it up. There's always more things that I find in the research, which is why when I talked about the justice, when I get to L for legal issues, that's going to come up again, because there's more information that I found that I just had to share because it was really, really good. So the last topic that I have, and I'll try to stretch this out to cover the rest of the show here today, is knowledge. That is the whole purpose that I'm doing these episodes on this show, why I talk about it on my podcast, why I educate all of my patients and their family members and their work comp coordinators that come with them. All of these things is the knowledge part of it, because we need to increase knowledge in the general public. We need to increase knowledge in the medical system so that we identify things more appropriately, so that we treat people more appropriately, give more compassion to people around us, all of the things. So when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about knowledge the rest of the time here so we can really get a good conversation about that knowledge. So Again, Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. I'm Mandi Dickey. We've been talking about concussion, ABCs, letters J and K. We've got one more after the break. Welcome back one last time for today on Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. Again, today, Dr. Sinacropi has been out, so it's just me, nurse practitioner Mandi Dickey, covering the ABCs of concussion on my TBI takeover this week. And we've been talking about the letters J and K. So lots of really good topics that we've covered today. If you're just joining us now, go back and re-listen to this one because it's a really good one. And if you haven't listened to the previous episodes of the ABCs of concussion, I would highly recommend it because we've covered a lot of really good stuff in this show. And as we will in coming episodes as well, and finishing off the alphabet. But it's a really good episode again to kind of think about all of those things that might be related to concussion that start with the letters J and K. So the last topic that I just started kind of hinting about before the break was knowledge. And again, this is the whole purpose of me doing this series. This is the whole purpose of me doing the education that I do in general, because we don't know enough about concussion. It's something that has affected people as long as people have existed, pretty much, but we just don't think about what all of those effects are. And every week on my own social medias, I talk about a myth related to concussion and kind of break that myth. And one that I covered recently was about research and whether or not 20-year-old data is good to accurately describe concussion now. And it is not. You cannot look back 20 years and think that that data in the research is just as good as things that we find now. 2024, 2025 have been banner years for research and new research coming out so that we know how to better identify concussion, how better to treat concussion. And there's so much new coming out that it's really eye-opening. And as a provider, I highly, highly, highly encourage my fellow providers out in the world, whether you're a nurse practitioner, PA, a physician, surgeon, neuropsychologist, anybody working in the healthcare field, therapist, OT, PT, look at the new research because there's new things coming out all the time, and that will help you to provide better care for your patient. For those of you listening who do not work in healthcare, it's still really important because approximately half of the people walking on this earth right now have had a head injury at some point in their lives, and everybody will be affected differently. Some people still have long-term effects. So we need to educate the public better. We need to educate healthcare better, coaches, teachers, basically anyone who interacts with other humans, so that you can be more compassionate, so that you can help identify when somebody has had a concussion, make sure they get to the correct treatment, because knowledge is power. And now that we know more about concussions, we can do better than we did in the past. And we should. When you know better, you need to do better. And previously, we didn't know that so many individuals continued having symptoms. We didn't know what the cumulative effect of multiple concussions had on the brain. We didn't know that you could sustain a concussion without hitting your head or losing consciousness, like I talked about at the beginning. We didn't know that there were so many treatment options that there are now. As I was saying, my patient that came in from a car accident 10 years ago, there wasn't much for her at that time. And we have so many other things now. We have our hypercharged wellness. We do red light therapy, so photobiomodulation, exercise with oxygen therapy, PEMF, the transcranial laser. All of those things have been proven in the research to be effective. I can tell you anecdotally, it helped me. It jump-started my recovery from my own concussion. Those things work. Neurofeedback, neurological chiropractic treatments. There are so many things out there that can work to help your brain outside of the traditional treatments that we've always thought. So as coaches, we need to be better about keeping students out of activities so that they don't get subsequent injuries. As general public, we need to know more so that we can advocate for ourselves, for our family members. So my word of advice to you moving forward today is read something about concussion that you didn't know before. Try to educate yourself so that you can be a better human to others that have had a concussion. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please consider joining next time as well for all of the great topics that we have here on Recharging the Human Battery on AM 950 radio. Again, Mandi Dickey, nurse practitioner here today. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care of yourselves and your family.